No music. I'm trying a no music intro because I was trying to find the right rock music, but I can't really play anything here on YouTube. I actually, my assistant GL is here working with a band, rock band, and I was just talking to him, and they're a like a gent band, or they're a heavy rock band. They're like prog rock, progressive metal band, and we were just talking about this exact topic. Hey everybody, invite your friends. What's up? What's up, Canada? Where's everybody from? So anyways, greetings. So I was asking him the questions that I always ask people that are from out of town that come in. Do you have a local radio station that plays rock music? And the answer is usually no, that there's a classic rock station. This is in the South. These guys are from, I think, Alabama. And then I ask, what do your friends listen to? This band said country and EDM music. And I'm always asking why. And these are always interesting questions. Actually, no. Then I asked them, do you know any band that's ever gotten a record deal? And they said no. Now, this never used to be the case. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I've had 25 bands that I've produced that have gotten record deals over the course of my career. It's about the same amount of bands have gotten signed as the amount of years that I've produced. But I don't think I've had a band get signed since 2006 or so. Greetings, everybody. Anyway, so there's no rock stations that play music. There are no bands that get signed, so there's really no template for anything. And because of that, there's not this groundswell of people. Since there's no guitar music on the radio, there's no kids wanting to learn guitar parts or guitar riffs or anything like that. So the guitar teachers are stuck teaching classic rock, or they teach them grunge, things like that are the last things that used to have riffs in them or actually had guitars in them. So it's amazing that these guys said that their friends listen to country music and EDM music. Now, what could be more different? Even though you hear some EDM and country songs now, and if you listen to the top, if you listen to the top of the charts, you'll hear some EDM music. Oh, by the way, my book is on sale for the live stream here. I have a coupon code here that I just generated. You guys know I don't always do it, but let's see here. I gotta walk in here. I think I just wrote it down here. Hold on, let me put it on here. Yeah, so it's AL426 is the coupon code. That's good for 24 hours. Also, my Modes of the Major Scale course, 25% off for 1 day. MT421 is the code. I'll plug in here. You guys can see me okay? So I was in the control room here. He's working, and it's interesting. So I just got an Axe Effects for those of you that are rock musicians, and my assistant Ken brought his Kemper in. So we have the Kemper and the Axe Effects on top of one another, and I've got all these amps over here. Beardy Man just said that clickbait title. He's the man. This is actually something that I talk about all the time. So I have many amps over here. These are some of my amps. So I have a bunch of real amplifiers. that I've used, and I've got other ones on the other side, but since they're doing a session, I can't go in there. And I tried out the Axe FX, and it sounds great. I mean, it really does. I've talked to a lot of bands, a lot of pro guys like Sinister Gates from Avenged Sevenfold. When they were opening, I went to see them open for Metallica. Metallica's playing Axe FX. Why? Because they don't want to lug around amps. I mean, that's really that's what people are doing now. They're all playing these profile amps, modeling amps, whatever they're called. Hold on, I look really weird here with this light. Let me move back a little bit. So these things are really, they're built really well and they're really reliable. So the question is, what do I do with these things back here? Do I need all these amps? Is rock dead? Is rock ever going to make a comeback? Now, I don't think so. I don't think it's going to ever come back in the same way that it was. Now, people on here that are into, progressive metal and the gent bands or whatever you want to call them. I call it prog metal. I mean, this has been going on since Meshuggah. It's been going on since the 90s. This particular style of metal has been going on for years. But that's really a small niche market. If you think about this realistically, and I don't want to do this based on album sales, but it's on what is the music that is huge worldwide. And most of the music that's huge worldwide right now is EDM music. Country music is not big worldwide. With country music that's big here, EDM and pop music, hip hop music, these are things that are big worldwide. There is no really any rock movement that is big worldwide. I went to see Beardy Man just said, hold on. He says, if you strike rock down, it will come back stronger. I hope that that's true. I do hope that that's true. I love rock. There. That's how much I love rock. People would always come in my studio and they would say, you have all 100-watt heads. Why is that? I said, because I love rock music. It's like you can't play rock music on I have an AC-30. I've got some small combos and everything, but it's like you got to play rock. You got to play through 412s and you got to play through 100-watt heads. Now I find out that everybody's using the Axe FX. So I'm trying one out right now, and I dig it. It sounds great. I love real amplifiers too. I tried to do in my live stream the other day, and I didn't even know how to use the thing. And I put up the Axe FX and I tried, and I couldn't figure out how to use it. But apparently that you have to hook it up to a computer, and then it's easier to adjust it's easier to adjust. Okay, so Beardy Man just said rock must die so it can be reborn. Well, bands like Nickelback did a pretty good job of killing rock music. All mass movements of music begin with the original bands, okay? So they start with bands like, for example, when 80s metal was going on, it started with bands, we can talk about bands like AC/DC or bands that started in the late 70s that became 80s metal bands. AC/DC was not an 80s metal band, but the bands like Def Leppard that started in the late 70s that were to become these massive monoliths in the 80s. So the kind of the hair metal movement happened throughout the 80s, and then you had Guns N' Roses come out. And I just saw Van Halen go across here. Now, Van Halen was a crossover because Van Halen started, the first record came out in 78. So that was a crossover band that bridged the two eras. They were never really a hair metal band in that way. They were never the same as the 80s bands. And even the early 80s bands were not the same as the middle to late 80s bands, because you started getting copy of a copy of a copy. And you get those bands that, what was that, Cherry Pie Band, those kind of bands like that were all just, third generation C-listers, D-listers, Poison, things like that, that were, just copies of copies. They were A&R guys going out there looking for these bands. Warrant, thank you. That were looking for bands that sounded like other bands, and they would just be, it's just like a Xerox. The more you copy it, those of you that remember Xerox machines, the more you copy it, the more faded it gets and the less you can read it. So, and I wouldn't put Cinderella. Somebody said Warrant and Cinderella. Cinderella was more of a blues-based band. So I wouldn't throw Cinderella I wouldn't throw them in the same category. Boston and Journey are not. Boston and Journey were definitely 70s bands. Now, Journey had their biggest record, Escape, in 1981. Okay, that was probably their pinnacle of their career, was that record. But they were a 70s band, and Boston was a 70s band. Even though Boston had big hits in the 80s, their biggest record is the first record, 1976. Okay, so then you get to grunge. Okay, so you had these transition bands in the late 80s that were Guns N' Roses, and you even had bands like Jane's Addiction that were the first bands that were kind of alternative bands, and you had the Red Hot Chili Peppers. There was a weird thing that happened, and then you had REM in the right around 1990. There was this change. Now, Soundgarden and Nirvana and bands like that, Mother Love Bone, were all going on in the late 80s. Grunge was happening then, but it was still underground. It was big in Seattle, but it was underground. So the grunge movement exploded with Nevermind. And then you had Pearl Jam, got to be as big as Nirvana with the first record, which was really, the first record was pretty much written off because it was put out in 91. And even into 92 was not big. Then all of a sudden it blew up and it became massively big. Alice in Chains. Then Soundgarden really had the last big record of grunge in the 90s with Super Unknown. Even though they did Down on the Upside, which is a phenomenal record, the last big record of theirs that was really the pinnacle of the grunge movement was Super Unknown. You had bands that were transition bands, because you had bands that were like Radiohead that were transitioned into other areas, and you had bands like Oasis that were these transitional figures that were this whole Brit pop movement that happened from around 94. Now, Radiohead was a little bit earlier, but these bands started to develop in the mid-90s, and then you had like bands like Bush. Now, these were the second-tier bands. Bush was the copy of Nirvana. Bush was the, it was the record labels trying to find bands that sounded like that. So Rock is a Game. Radiohead completed the game. Discuss points. Okay. Beardy Man's awesome. I love this. So anyways, in the mid-90s, though, you started having bands like Hootie and the Blowfish, like Dave Matthews. You had bands like Live. Those of you that remember Live. You had Silverchair. You had No Doubt. So these were these transitional bands. And then you had the Foo Fighters, which started in 95, okay? A lot of the bands didn't make it over the hump to 2000. In 97, this is when the nu metal movement. So rock was still massively big worldwide. Hugely big worldwide. Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, they were as big in South America as they were in Japan, as they were in Europe. These were worldwide, massively big bands. Then in 97, you had Creed. You had Limp Bizkit coming out. This was the beginnings of nu metal and of the bands that started to become successful again. Because there was a lull. There was really a lull. And I know this because I was in a band at the time. And my band was more a throwback 70s band. It was hard to find people that were producers or engineers, because I didn't produce or engineer back then. I had just started producing a little bit. But there weren't the people out there that you could go to that you could say, oh, this guy is a great rock guy. Because, I mean, there were the guys, the producers like Dave Jordan that did Alice in Chains records. There was, I'm trying to think who did Rick Parasher that did Temple of the Dog and the first Pearl Jam record. There was Michael Beinhorn that did Super Unknown that produced that. There wasn't necessarily, somebody just said, what about the Melvins? Love the Melvins. Love Rage Against the Machine. So Rage, once again. So Rage started out in the early 90s as well. First record was produced by Garth Richardson. Great record. Andy Wallace mixed it. Phenomenal record. Second record, Evil Empire, Brendan O'Brien. Phenomenal record. Very different sounding. Andy Wallace mixed that too. These are really, but they weren't grunge records. They were not grunge records. Just like you couldn't say that Audioslave was a grunge record, was a grunge band. They weren't. Korn was not a grunge band, but Korn was big in the 90s. Huge, massively big in the 90s. So there was all this kind of transition into nu metal that happened from the mid 90s into the early 2000s. But during this mid 90s period, this was a really weird time, because don't forget, there was Lilith Fair that happened, and you had the explosion of people like Sarah McLachlan and a lot of female bands. Filter was a band that was big because their first record, I think Short Bus, came out in 94 with Hey Man, Nice Shot was on it. So this transition period in between grunge and nu metal, rock was still huge. Okay, so you had Rage Against the Machine, you had Foo Fighters, you had all these bands. Smashing Pumpkins were putting out records still. Velvet Revolver, not quite yet. Anyways, this is also when, Slipknot, Stained, yeah, Chevelle, but these were the beginnings of the no-name bands, not Slipknot. Not necessarily Stained. People knew Aaron Lewis, the singer for Stained, but they were the beginnings of the faceless bands. This is where the transition happened, where rappers and rap music and hip-hop took over and the people became the rock stars, okay? And I see people, Deftones and everything, these are all, and they made incredibly great some incredibly great records. And I shouldn't leave out Terry Date, who'd made some great sounding records with Soundgarden and did White Pony with Deftones. Excellent record. And somebody keeps asking me about Opeth here. Well, we're not there yet. Tool, amazing. King's X, once again, King's X was more of a periphery figure, and I love King's X. And Fugazi was obviously not a grunge band. They were a punk band, but King's X was I would say a peripheral band. Those of you that know King's X, their record, I talked about this the other day, Dog Man is a phenomenal record. Great sounding record. And Ty Tabor, who plays guitar in King's X, is a great player and always sounded great. That Dog Man, you want to hear a great sounding rock record that is super fat? That was a Brendan O'Brien record, I believe, where he produced and mixed it, and it is incredible. But Ty Tabor is a great guitar player. His rhythm parts are super tight. He played on, it didn't matter what gear he played on, they always sounded great. They have prog elements and they have rock elements. They're a rock band though. They're a heavy rock band, but they were not part of a movement really, like grunge, where you could put them together. Now you can't say that all grunge bands were the same, because Nirvana and Alice in Chains were nothing alike. Pearl Jam and Soundgarden were really, they had some similarities, but only when they played in Temple of the Dog, really. Then you had bands coming on, System of a Down and things like that, these interesting bands. But the transition over the 2000, the year 2000 was really interesting because a lot of bands did not make it over 2000. A band like Live, for example, that was a big band in the 90s, had a lot of hits. They didn't make it over the 2000 mark. You still had a huge movement. The biggest year in the music business was in the year 2000. That was when they sold the most records ever. It was a multi-billion-dollar industry then. You had one label, Zomba, that had Backstreet Boys and Britney, I think, and who's the other big boy band that Justin Timberlake. That they sold that one record. That one label had $1 billion profit, I want to say, in 2000. That was literally the biggest year. Okay, somebody just said that I have 160 likes with 750 people on here. So some of you must be liking if there's that many people on here. So like the video because it helps later on. Anyways, NSYNC, thank you, NSYNC. Napster happened in 99. You guys hear me talk about that all the time. So... But rock was still huge. Rock sold records. Rock made money. And they kept making money. And record labels kept signing bands up until about the year 2005. Before Mars Volta, I keep seeing Mars Volta on there because you had... what's the band? Mars Volta that they were in before Mars Volta that had one arm scissor that who's the band? Who am I thinking of? At the Drive-In, thank you. At the Drive-In, Ross Robinson I think produced that record. Great record. That At the Drive-In record is amazing. I love that record. So these bands were still doing well. Linkin Park was a worldwide band. Okay, they were big everywhere. But Creed was not. And bands like Nickelback were not worldwide bands. They were not the same. They didn't have that same... The Foo Fighters were a worldwide band, definitely. But they were a worldwide band because Dave Grohl was a rock star. But the era of the rock star began to diminish in the 2000s, and it was really because of all the faceless grunge or the faceless nu metal bands. Chevelle, bands I even worked with like Shinedown. Brent is a phenomenal singer, but nobody knows who any of these people are. Nobody knows the players in any of these bands. Pretty much every band, even at the time. Honestly, most people. Other than Chester and Mike in Linkin Park, most of the people don't know the rest of the guys in Linkin Park. They don't know the guitar player Brad. They don't know any of these. They don't know any of the names of the people in any of these bands. Puddle of Mudd is another band, no name. They might have known the dude, the Wes, whatever what's the singer's name? Who knows any of these people in any of these bands? They were just faceless bands. All these bands were, and. Because of that, because of these faceless bands, Disturbed, nobody really knew the guys in the band. They just didn't. They had huge bands, but nobody knew. Blink-182, it's interesting because at the same time that this was going on, that pop-punk movement was happening. Green Day was a huge band. Green Day was a huge band since the early 90s, since 94 or so. They were huge band in the early 90s. Somebody said Andy Wallace mixed almost all of it. He did. He actually mixed almost all these bands. He mixed Helmet. He mixed Jeff Buckley. He mixed Nirvana. He mixed Rage Against the Machine, Linkin Park, you name it. Filter, actually, no, Ben Gross mixed the Filter records. Ben Gross actually, somebody said Alter Bridge. Ben Gross actually produced the first Alter Bridge record and mixed it. Helmet was a great band that kind of went by the wayside. Page Hamilton was great, the lead singer, the guitar player in the band. He was a great writer and that was one of the first big low drop D kind of bands there. Anyways, so I keep seeing Queens of the Stone Age too. Yeah, I mean, you can say, okay, there's all these instances of bands that had great records, but they were not dominant forces in the world. They were not, Tool was a massively big band. A Perfect Circle, they were huge bands. They weren't huge, Tool was. But most of these other bands I'm talking about, these faceless bands, were not world famous. They weren't. Chevelle was not a world famous band. Puddle of Mudd was not a world famous band. None of those bands. All those faceless rock bands is what ultimately led, to me, to the demise of rock music. And then you got the Nickelhead thing, and I really think the uncoolness of Nickelback, from the image to and the overexposure of them, plus the fact that that people didn't really know these guys. They knew that they didn't like Chad Kroeger, his voice. He was like, all his vocals started on 10 and had nowhere to go. When you think about Photograph, and he starts screaming at the beginning of this, and it just, all capital letters, exactly, whoever just wrote that. It was on 10 all the way through, and that eventually wore on people, and the predictability of it wore on people. And rap music started emerging it had been around since the early 80s, but all the people in rap, I noticed it being from Atlanta or living in Atlanta through this, because you started seeing people that I knew from working in studios like Little John, that started becoming these big stars, that were guys that were local guys here in Atlanta. And crunk, that genre of rap music, was really big, 99 to 2002 or so, was right here in Atlanta. And you had Outkast, and you had a lot of bands like that, Yin Yang Twins, things like that. Atlanta was really, really big. It was the epicenter of hip hop and rap, was Atlanta during that time. I saw, somebody just said something about White Stripes and the Strokes. Once again, White Stripes, great band, huge band, but they weren't part of a movement. Neither were the Strokes. They weren't they weren't part of a worldwide movement that you could label. Grunge was really, to me, the last worldwide rock movement. And you can say, oh, Gent is big, or these bands, there's a small movement of it. They weren't worldwide bands. I just saw, somebody says Oasis. I saw this hilarious thing with Liam Gallagher talking about, he was getting coffee. It was going around Facebook. He was getting coffee. And Slipknot was big worldwide. Okay, Slipknot, their first record came out in 99. They were a band worldwide. And Linkin Park was a big band worldwide. There were some bands that were worldwide that were from the nu metal era. And Slipknot is not a nu metal band. And I always thought that term was kind of a weird term, because it didn't really fit a lot of those. I didn't think it really fit a lot of those bands necessarily. But the thing where you consistently had singles that were on the radio, the same songs all over the world. Smells Like Teen Spirit was a #1 song all over the world. Fell on Black Days, or not Fell on Black Days, but Black Hole Sun, or Alive, or Even Flow, or things like that. These were worldwide #1 songs in multiple countries. They were #1 in Italy, in Japan, in down in Brazil, in the U.S., in Germany, in England, everywhere. They were #1 records. The same songs were huge. Now, what are the reasons for this? And is it ever going to change? Why? I mean, to me, it was obvious what the decline was. The decline was the... and by the way, I'll say this while I've got all these people on here. Subscribe to my channel if you don't subscribe. Hit the subscribe button now. Somebody just said MTV died. MTV died long before that. MTV was a driver of music through the 80s and up into the early 90s. A huge driver. If it wasn't for MTV, bands like Nirvana, Nirvana was, because I remember, because I watched MTV all the time in 1991, and I saw Nirvana, and I already knew Nirvana because I had Bleach in the late 80s, and I was into indie rock then. And so I saw Nirvana take over the music business. I knew from people in the music industry that were friends of mine that Nirvana was, and I remember having this conversation with Gary Gersh that signed Nirvana. He signed them to DGC, to Geffen, basically off of Bleach, which Bleach had sold 46,000 records. That was it. But they knew that the Seattle scene, people knew the Seattle scene was really happening. So Gary signed them, and he told me, I talked to him, he was interested in a band I produced years ago. That's why. And he came to Atlanta, and I went out with him for dinner one night, and I asked him about Nirvana, because he was really instrumental in not only Nirvana, but Radiohead. Because Radiohead became really big when he was running Capitol Records. I think it was Capitol that he was running at the time. So Radiohead, were they on Capitol or Virgin? He was the president of the label and really put Radiohead on the map, made them, they were, Creep was a decent sized song, but it wasn't until the Bends came out that Radiohead started to blow up. But he made them a priority here in the U.S., and that was a really big thing. Capitol, they were on Capitol, and Gary Gersh was running Capitol after, because he had so much success with signing Nirvana. He signed the Posies, he signed the Counting Crows, he signed all these bands at DGC. He signed Sonic Youth. It was big. So, grunge, worldwide movement, Kurt Cobain died, it started to diminish. Then you had bands like Hootie and the Blowfish and things that take over. All the transition bands, all the female artists in the mid 90s, and then you start getting into nu metal with Limp Bizkit, things like that. Fast forward, 2005, 2006, 2007. Red Hot Chili Peppers, yes. Now, Red Hot Chili Peppers was, come on, they were big in the 80s. They were big all the way through their 90s. Their biggest record is probably Blood Sugar Sex Magik, Californication. Those were huge records. But Blood Sugar Sex Magik is a more than 10 million selling record. Anyways, mid-2000s, you had the bands, the Breaking Benjamins, all this kind of stuff. And then you had kind of the fall of Nickelback. And really, that was it pretty much for rock. That was it. There were bands. There were bands that like I said about when people talk about gent, or that style of progressive metal. Listen to Meshuggah. Meshuggah was doing this in the 90s. Okay, this type of music. It was their progressive metal. And they were a big band, and so that style had been around, but these things are just not on the radio, and there's no bands that get signed anymore. That stopped happening in the mid-2000s when the record business fell off a cliff. Okay, now things like EDM, why did these things start to become big? Well, one of the reasons is that you didn't need to go into a studio to make this, to record the tracks. That was a big thing about this. By the way, I have my book is on sale right now. I'll tell you guys in my Modes of the Major Scale course, I have a coupon code. Well, I got people on here. It's, let's see here, I'll tell you what it is. I said it at the beginning of the thing. For Modes of the Major Scale coupon code, you get 25% off MT421. And for my Beato book or my PDF, $10 off is AL426 coupon code. So EDM music. And I was talking to these guys. So there's literally a band in the next room right now recording. They're like a gent band. I mean, they're a progressive metal band. So, and I asked him, I said, why do you think these things are so big? He says, well, they say, well, nobody wants to play the guitar, number one, because it takes time to learn. And people don't want to take the time to learn how to play the guitar. It's just as easy to take out your laptop and put on GarageBand and start making tunes. You can make a tune and put it on Bandcamp. You can put it on SoundCloud. You can put it on Facebook. You can put it on YouTube. It's instant gratification. You don't even have to know anything. You just put some loops together and you sing over it. Now, to do it at a top level, you got to be really good at it. I'm not going to tell you that making EDM music and doing great tracks is easy. It is not. Trust me, I've worked on EDM tracks. I've worked with some great producers. Writing top lines are lyrics and melody. That's, and it's not easy. I'm not going to say, oh, all you need is a synthesizer. No, these things, to do really creative things, there's a lot of complexity to it. And there's a lot of, when you're doing certain types of filtering, you're doing all these different sonic effects. There's a lot of attention to detail in EDM music, and really well done. Getting the low end right, everything, getting the kick drum hard. Doing anything well is difficult. It is. People make fun of me because I always see people on here saying, cash me outside the what's her name, Barbie Baby or whatever, her song. When all my friends were outraged by this song, and I go and listen to it, and I'm like, wow, production's really good on this. I mean, I wanted to hate the song, and I listened to it. I'm thinking like, man, vocals sound killer. They have this great distortion on the vocal, and I have to be honest about it. I can appreciate the sonic characteristics of things that I'm not even interested in the music. I like the production. That comes from being a producer. I like sounds. I can appreciate a great bass tune. I can appreciate a filter sweep that's done really well. And it sounds hilarious to think of, but appreciation doesn't equal liking. That's actually interesting, because I don't listen to it in the same way. I can enjoy it where I appreciate it. No, I actually appreciate it more than I like it. Wait, what did you say there? Appreciation doesn't equal liking. True. That is actually very true. I can appreciate something. There's bands whose records I don't like at all, but I love the sound of. There's plenty of bands that I will listen to, I'll say, man, that's a great sounding record. There are a couple new metal records that I think sound killer, but I can't stand the music. But the guitar sounds are so heavy. But ultimately the sounds are terrible. Now, somebody says something about Rush here. You appreciate Rush, but you don't listen to it. Now, I love Geddy Lee's voice. Absolutely love his voice. I know it's an acquired taste. I like Rush from the 70s. I like the 70s Rush. I didn't really listen to the 80s Rush. I like Farewell to Kings. I like Hemispheres. I like 2112. I like all those early records. They were great. That's the stuff that I grew up with. Anyways, so if you think about who are the worldwide famous bands right now that can actually do incredibly well everywhere, let's be honest. Foo Fighters, Muse. Can Muse do well everywhere? Muse is not in the Foo Fighters league as far as size. The National is a great indie rock band and can do 5,000 tickets anywhere here in the United States. But can they, can the Black Keys do 10,000 tickets? I mean, you can't compare the what Pearl Jam was doing or what Metallica was doing. You know, when I saw Metallica play with Avenged Sevenfold opening, Avenged Sevenfold is a massively big band worldwide, but these are isolated. These are isolated bands. They're not parts of movements now. Coldplay can, you know, I mean, to me, a band that's a worldwide band, that's a dominant band, can they play an arena on any continent? Basically, that is kind of the that are they a new band that can play a? I mean, U2 can play an arena on any continent, but are they a new band? Are there new bands that can do it? Can Imagine Dragons play everywhere in the world, play an arena? I don't know if they can, actually. I don't know if Imagine Dragons can play an arena in Brazil right now. Maybe they can. Maybe they can't. Can anyone answer that? Nope, they can't. Are there people that are in Brazil right now? There must be people in Brazil right here watching this. Can Imagine Dragons play an arena in Brazil? Anybody? Nope. Okay, so these are you saying nope from Brazil? Not. Okay. I see AC/DC. Of course they can play arenas, you know. Alter Bridge. Alter Bridge doesn't play arenas in Brazil. I mean, I don't, you know. Dream Theater. But these are bands that have been around forever. You know, these guys, I mean, Dream Theater's been around since, for 30 years. Can Skrillex play arenas? I mean, we're talking about rock bands, you know. Now you can have EDM artists that are and is Imagine Dragons, are they even a rock band? I would say yes, actually. I would say Imagine Dragons is a rock band. I don't dig their new record as much as their first record, I don't think, but the new record's got some good songs on it too. John Mayer plays arenas, but John Mayer has been around since the year 2000. John Mayer got signed, put out his first record in 2001. Okay, so, anything that's pre-2005 is, that, before rock started to fall off a cliff. I mean, that didn't really happen in 2005. It happened later. It did. Nu metal didn't really start dying until at least 2010 or so. Band of Horses is a great band. They're but once again, there's no worldwide movement. But really, what worldwide movements are there? There's no worldwide movement of rock. There isn't. Now, Snarky Puppy, is there a worldwide? They're not a rock band though. 30 Seconds to Mars. I'll tell an interesting aside. I was talking about this the other day. The first date I went on with my wife was with we went to see Audio Slave with 30 Seconds to Mars opening back in 2005, and I didn't know who Jared Leto was. And he came up to me. Went backstage after, because my friend was the program director at the radio station here, and she invited me and my wife, she and her husband, and we met them backstage, and they went and talked to 30 Seconds to Mars. They were a new band. I didn't know who they were, and I ended up talking to the singer, and he was telling me that he said, yeah, I went to Decatur and here in Georgia. He said I went to Mark David Chapman's house, and I'm thinking, like, what's he talking about? I'm researching for a role. I'm going to play Mark David Chapman. I'm thinking, I don't know who this guy is. Mark David Chapman is the guy that shot John Lennon. I shouldn't even say his name. But I had no idea who Jared Leto was. So, anyways, that's my Jared Leto story there. He was the nicest guy. I'm like, who is this guy? Anyway, so Rammstein, 1992 first record, I think, something like that. I don't think that we can really, put these these bands on the same level. There is no worldwide movement to do this. By the way, if you're in New York City, I'm coming to New York. I'm doing 3 seminars on November 7th. Please come. Whoever is in the New York area wants to drive to New York to meet me in person. It's the first time I've ever taken my show on the road. They're not going to be on YouTube or anything. You can meet Adam Neely. He's coming to one of the shows. If any of you that follow him, I'm going to do a thing with Adam the day before too that we'll do on YouTube Live. But I'm going to do 3 seminars on that day. It's on my website. Go to rickbeato.com. You can see. But sign up and come because it's going to be killer. We can meet in person. That's all my hype that I'm going to do on that. Muse, Tame Impala, great bands. I mean, there's great indie rock movement going on here with bands like The National, War on Drugs, Tame Impala. There's a lot of great bands that are huge, that are actually big worldwide, that are rock bands. They're indie rock bands though, but they're not big in the same way. They're not like Soundgarden. They're not like Alice in Chains. They're not like Pearl Jam. Arctic Monkeys, huge band. I keep seeing Deftones on here. I love Deftones. So I love Pantera. I see Pantera in capital letters there. I saw it every time though. Arcade Fire, another band that's a big band worldwide, no question about it. But I don't think that I don't know if rock is ever going to come back, and that's really kind of what this talk was about. I can't see. Killswitch Engage is a big band, but they're not that big. I don't know if emo music was part of this, that the stuff that happened in the with My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if that was. I think that actually had something to do with the death of rock also. I think that, and I love Bullet for My Valentine. Once again, though, they've been around for 20 years now, just about. So Switchfoot is not a worldwide band, I wouldn't say, right? I mean, they're not even, and I like Switchfoot. I like one of their records actually one of their records I like. I'm a fan of the sound of it. I'm trying to think of the record too. There's a great sounding. They had one record that was really great sounding. It was super fat. Anyways, I'm going to throw it out there to you guys. Feel free to comment in here if you think that I'm wrong about this. And you can point to a worldwide movement that is a rock movement. I'm talking worldwide with current bands that have songs on the radio that are hits that are all over the world and that can play arenas. Because every band we talked about in 1992, Pearl Jam could play arenas everywhere. And so could the Chili Peppers, so could Nirvana, so could Soundgarden, so could, Alice in Chains. I mean, these things were huge. Metallica, these things were, some were bigger than others, but that was it. You guys are awesome. Hit the like button now. Hit the like button. There's a lot of people on here. Those likes should be way over 800. They should be over 1,000. So my video gets out there. They've been demonetizing my videos for some reason. Like they're not worth putting advertising in front of or something. That's a new thing that Casey Neistat's even having. He has got videos with $2 million that are getting demonetized. Make a comment here. Like the videos. There's a coupon code for my Modes of the Major Scale. That's AL426. It'll be here just till tomorrow this time. And for my Beato book, that's for the Beato book. And then for my Modes of the Major Scale, MT421. Panic at the Disco is one of the bands I forgot to mention in here. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much. Talk to you later.